Now that we've taken a look at the for loop, we can move on to analyzing the while loop. And for that, we're going to build a simple program that uses a while loop to loop through an iterative value. And depending on the value of that iteration, it's going to display a different color on the screen in terms of the text color. So it's going to cycle through. We're going to be able to see those values within each loop iteration. And then we're going to get a different color as well, just to visualize it as it goes through. So let's get started. We're going to need an include statement here for preprocessor, which is going to be stdlib.h. Okay. And then we're going to need also input and output. So that's going to be string. So stdlib is necessary for it actually changing the color of the text. So this is why we're including that here. So let's go on then, and the next bit will be the namespace declaration. And then we have our main function to run our code. Okay, so now the downside with a while loop is that you have to declare that that tracker variable that I told you about, the one that tracks the iteration, so where we are on the loop, okay? And you have to declare it outside of the while loop, so before the loop itself. So to some people, it can look simpler. I generally do prefer it, but it's more of a personal choice at this stage, really. So we have to declare it here. Let's say our I would be starting at 0. So that's going to track our iterations. And then here we declare our while loop. So the body of the while loop is as follows. We have the while keyword that is declaring that while loop. And then we have our condition within the parentheses, sort of like an if statement. So it's basically saying, well, this condition is true to the following. So it's kind of like an if statement that just repeats itself, essentially. And you can think of it that way. So for this, we need to specify the condition in here. In this case, let's say I is less than 20, right? And then we can specify the block of code that we want repeated within the body. So you can see here why to some people it can make a bit more sense when you, when you read it, it flows a bit better, I suppose, than a for loop, in the sense that you define this separately. So this could come from any other source, any other bit in your code, really. And then you're just looping through it in here. So while this is true, then do that. I guess it's a bit similar to the if statement. So you can accomplish the same things with both the for loop and the while loop. The while loop will just essentially keep on going until you get to this point. You also have to worry about writing in an increment. So, for example, in this case, we're going to do I plus plus. So after each loop, at the end of it, it's going to increment by 1. You could, in theory, you could put it in the beginning, right? Depending on what you want to accomplish, you could do that. But just to keep things simple, and I'm going to keep things, I guess, similar to that for loop that we looked at previously. So you can just see the difference in the syntax and focus on that. I'm going to keep it at the end, right? Because when we were looking at the for loops, if you remember, the increment happens towards the end, so at the end of that for loop. And now we can start thinking about what actually happens in here. So let's say that if I is divisible by 2, so if it's an even number, then we'll get a certain color. So we can do system color foreground. F stands for the foreground, and then we put in a number. Okay. Let's see what's happening here. System is undefined. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So otherwise, we get a different color. That we can do color F1. Okay. So the color itself doesn't really matter, but just so yeah, you can visualize it, we're going to use those two ones. And then we're going to print out the value of, you can see it, value of the iterator. I this, and then we'll print out the value of I. Okay. So let's run that code and see what that looks like. Actually, let's add in a line break here. Maybe that'll be a bit easier. Let's try that on your end. And there we go. So as you can see, it was switching the color every single time it was going through that iteration. And it went 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, right up until we got to 19. Because once it gets to 19, it's true. But then on the next iteration, it will actually go to 20 and it would evaluate, okay, 20 is actually not lower than 20, so that would be false. So let's take it from the beginning and try to visualize this loop in our heads. So we set the iterator value to 0 as a starting point. So we're starting with 0. This first time it would equal true, right? 0 is less than 20. Then 0 would be divisible by 2. So it would trigger this first color. So it would be an even number. It would trigger color F2. And then otherwise, actually this wouldn't get run on the first iteration. And then we would print out the value of the iterator tracker is, and then I, and then a line break. Then at this point, we are adding 1 to 0. So the result is 1. So I is now 1. And we get back to the top. Now we have 1 less than 20, and that would trigger true still, right? So we go on to the body of the loop. Is 1 divisible by 2? No, so we wouldn't trigger color F2, we would trigger color F1. And then we print out the value of I as 1 up until this point. Then we add 1 to the iterator value, meaning we now have I being equal to 2. And again, we loop back to the beginning of that while loop, and now we evaluate 2 less than 20. Is that true? It's true. So we keep going, right? We get into the body of the loop, and now we have 2 dividing by 2. So is that divisible by 2, right? Are we going to get a 0 remainder? And that's the case. Therefore, we print out F2. And you can play around with the parameters. So you could, for example, make this 100. It would go on a little bit longer, but let's check that out. You can see it's flicking back and forth between the colors. And there you go. So it went up all the way to 99, actually. So if you wanted to go up to 100, you would have to make that less or equal to. That way, when it does hit 100, that condition is still true. There you go. So try and have a go and change a number of things, get comfortable, try to make your own loops. Just play with code. That's really the best way to learn on your own and making sure that that knowledge does stick. And rather than trying to remember the syntax, if you actually use the code and try to build your own loops, that's really when it's going to sticking in your head for you to remember it. So that's it for program number 2 of session 6.